Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely deconstruct one of literature's most famous figures. So if you think you already know everything there is to know about Shakespeare's classic play The Tempest, we'll get ready to look at it through an entirely new academic lens. We're zeroing in on Prospero, and we're examining him not just as some magical duke stuck on an isolated island, but actively as a colonial leader. Okay, let's dive right into this. Is Prospero a magical hero or a colonial tyrant? For literally centuries, audiences and scholars have viewed this iconic 17th century character as this wise, wronged nobleman, right? A guy who just uses his magic for justice. But today, we're going to rethink that entirely. We're using critical theory to completely reevaluate his actions, his authority, and his very real impact on the native inhabitants of his island.
So here is our roadmap for today. 1. The Age of Expansion. 2. Enter post-colonial theory. 3. Prospero, the colonial leader. 4. Ruling Caliban and Ariel. 5. Language as imperial power. And finally, 6. Enduring colonial discourse.
All right, Section 1, The Age of Expansion. To really get this play, we have to look at the world Shakespeare was living in. In the late 15th century, major global voyages are just kicking off. Fast forward to the 16th century, and European powers are actively establishing these massive overseas territories. And right here, in the early 17th century, is when Shakespeare sits down to write The Tempest. He was heavily inspired by the real-life 1609 shipwreck of the Sea Venture in Bermuda. Think about it, the undiscovered island, the claiming of foreign land, these were literally the breaking news stories of his day.
Moving on to Section 2. Enter post-colonial theory.
To really unpack this, we're going to apply the frameworks of some absolute heavy hitters in post-colonial thought. We're talking Edward Said's Orientalism and Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, right through to Gayatri Spivak's incredibly pivotal work, Can the Subaltern Speak? We'll also be leaning on Homi K. Bhabha and Aimé Césaire. These thinkers provide the objective academic lenses we absolutely need to really step back and reevaluate our main character.
Which brings us to Section 3, Prospero, the colonial leader.
Traditionally, Prospero is read as a wronged duke, a magical sage, and just a loving father trying to protect his daughter. Kind of the classic good guy, right? But the post-colonial view frames him very, very differently. Here, he's seen as an invader, a usurper, and ultimately a colonial leader. Drawing on the frameworks established by thinkers like Edward Said, we can impartially observe how Prospero arrives on an island that is absolutely not his, claims it as his own, and systematically subjugates its native inhabitants. Under this academic reading, his magic isn't just some mystical superpower, it actually serves as a direct metaphor for superior colonial technology and knowledge, which he uses to assert utter dominance.
Let's keep building on that in Section 4, Ruling Caliban and Ariel.
So, look at how Prospero's rule impacts his subjects. On one hand, we have Caliban, who represents the rebellious colonized subject. If we apply the frameworks of Frantz Fanon and Aimé Césaire, Caliban's intense anger and violent resistance are understood as completely natural responses to the trauma of being colonized and having his homeland seized. But on the other hand, we have Ariel, representing the compliant, assimilated subject. Ariel serves Prospero faithfully, basically hoping to eventually earn his freedom. And this dynamic perfectly maps onto Homi K. Bhabha's concepts of mimicry and ambivalence, where the colonized subject is forced to adopt the master's ways, but remains inherently separated from true, actual equality.
To really fully grasp their positions under Prospero's rule, we need to talk about the subaltern. This is a crucial term popularized by Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. It describes the marginalized, oppressed populations who are entirely denied a voice within colonial power structures. They are the people pushed to the very bottom of the hierarchy, structurally silenced by the colonizer. Take a second to really grasp this concept, because it changes absolutely everything about how we read the dialogue in this text.
Which leads us straight to this vital question. Can Caliban or Ariel truly speak for themselves under Prospero's rule? If we take Spivak's theory and apply it directly to the play, it really prompts us to consider the true autonomy of these colonized subjects. Think about it. When they speak, are they expressing their authentic native selves, or are they just operating within the restricted parameters that Prospero, their colonial leader, has forced upon them?
All right, Section 5, Language as Imperial Power.
Just listen to this incredibly powerful quote from Caliban. And by the way, his very name is likely an anagram for cannibal. He says to Prospero, "You taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse." It is such a brilliant moment.
It shows exactly how language is imposed as an imperial tool. Prospero forced his language onto Caliban in this attempt to quote-unquote civilize him. Yet at the exact same time, Caliban completely subverts it, using that very same language as a weapon of resistance to literally curse his colonizer.
So we see this intense dual nature at play. Language represents forced assimilation, but it also becomes the sole means for the colonized to actually articulate their defiance. As a colonial leader, Prospero genuinely believes he's giving the gift of civilization through language. But post-colonial theory reveals this as an act of erasure. He's actively overwriting their native identity. And this power dynamic, this tug-of-war between language and control, is absolutely central to the dramatic tension in the whole play.
Moving to our final part, Section 6, Enduring Colonial Discourse.
So, what does this all mean when we put it together? Well, all these elements cohesively reframe the entire play. Magic isn't just a fun fantasy element anymore, it actively symbolizes superior colonial technology. Caliban and Ariel aren't just magical sidekicks, they represent radically differing, very human responses to being colonized, rebellion versus assimilation. Language functions as an active instrument of control, and ultimately, the entire narrative directly mirrors historical European expansion. This is Prospero's role as a colonial leader, laid entirely bare for us to see.
And honestly, this is exactly why we do this. Understanding classic texts through a post-colonial lens reveals the hidden power dynamics of the past. Whether you're a university-level student or, frankly, just a curious mind, reevaluating literature really matters. We aren't destroying old interpretations here, we're expanding them. We are recognizing that the art created during the Age of Expansion fundamentally carries the DNA of that era's worldview, for better or for worse.
Because those colonial dynamics we see in The Tempest, they aren't just stuck back in the 17th century. They still echo in our modern media and culture today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Going forward, keep an eye out for who is holding the metaphorical magic staff in the stories you read, and ask yourself, who holds the power to name and define reality in the narratives we consume today?